Orms. Hello there, friend, and welcome, however long your own day has been. However heavy the weight you have carried into this night, you can begin now to set it down. You do not have to solve anything here. You do not have to be strong here. You can let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow, and simply let yourself be carried, for a little while, out onto the still grey water of a Galilean morning, into the company of a weary fisherman at the end of a long and fruitless night. For tonight our story is about exactly that, about coming to the end of your own strength, or about the long night when everything you try comes up empty, and about what can happen, or when you have nothing left, if someone steps into the boat beside you. This is one more night on the long journey we are walking together, you and I, through the oldest and truest stories ever told. We have spent some evenings now in the towns along this small grey lake in Galilee, getting to know the people whose lives were being touched and turned by a man from Nazareth. We sat with a woman who was found in her darkness and called by name. We watched a holy day of rest fall across a town and reveal its hearts. We spent a gentle afternoon among children gathered into welcoming arms. Tonight we come to one of the great turning points of the whole story. The night a strong and weary fisherman came to the very end of himself, met in that emptiness, the beginning of an entirely new life. If these quiet journeys are a comfort to you at the close of your day, you are welcome to stay near and follow along. If you feel like it, you might leave a soft tap on the like button before you drift off. Since I am told it rests easier when someone remembers it. Now, let us go back to that grey water and to the man with the empty net. His name was Simon, and we have met him before, though not at his best. We have seen him already, this strong and capable fisherman of Capernaum, on a night when he could find no rest. Man bowed down under a burden too heavy to carry and too stubborn to set down. We have seen how the weight of debt and the hard grind of life under a foreign empire pressed on him. How the fear of losing everything followed him out onto the water and would not let him sleep, and how he gripped that burden tighter and tighter, certain that if he did not save himself, no one would. He was a man who trusted his own strength above all things, and for most of his life that strength had been enough. But now he had come up against a wall that no strength of his could break through, and he did not yet know that the breaking of his own strength would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to him. For there is a particular kind of darkness that comes to the strong and the capable, a darkness the weak sometimes learn to avoid because they gave up on their own strength long ago. It is the darkness of the self-reliant heart pushed past the limit of what it can do. Simon was a skilled fisherman, perhaps the best on that stretch of shore. He knew the lake in all its moods. He knew where the fish ran and when, knew the deep places and the shallow, knew how to read the water and the weather and the season. His whole sense of himself was built on being good at this, on being able to provide, or to solve, to handle whatever came. Now the lake had gone silent on him. Now his skill, his knowledge, his strength, the very things he had always relied on, were failing him utterly, and he was being forced, slowly, painfully, toward the one place he had spent his whole life avoiding. The place where he had nothing left, where his own strength was spent, where he would have to admit that he could not save himself. It is a hard place to be brought to, and yet, as we will see, it is so often the doorway to everything that matters. For as long as we believe we can manage on our own, as long as our own strength seems enough, we rarely reach for anything beyond ourselves. It is only when we come to the end of what we can do, when every effort has failed and every plan has come up empty, or that our gripping hands finally begin to open, and we become at last able to receive what we could never have produced. Oh, Simon did not know it yet, there in the grey dawn with his empty net, but he was standing at exactly such a doorway. His long night of failure was not the end of his story. It was the necessary emptying that had to come before the filling. And on the shore, in the gathering light, the one who would fill it was already drawing near. There is a reason this particular night has been remembered and retold for 2,000 years. And it is not mainly the wonder that came at the end of it, astonishing as that was. It is that the shape of Simon's night is the shape of so many of our own. We all know, in our own way, what it is to labor through a long darkness and come up empty. Or we know the particular ache of pouring everything we have into something and watching it come to nothing. We know the weariness of the early hours, the slumped shoulders, the quiet voice that asks whether any of it was worth it. And we know too, the temptation that comes in that place, the temptation to believe that the emptiness is the whole truth, or that the long, fruitless night is all there will ever be. Simon's story is precious because it meets us exactly there, in the empty boat at the end of the dark, and it tells us that the story is not over, that the morning can hold things the night could never have promised. So if you come to this night carrying your own empty nets, your own long stretch of effort that seems to have yielded nothing, then you are in good company, and this is a good story for you to hear. We are not going to rush past the emptiness, because the emptiness is real and it deserves to be honored. But neither are we going to stop there, because the emptiness in this story turns out not to be the end but the beginning, necessary clearing of the ground, before something entirely new could grow. Let us walk into it slowly then, and feel its weight, and trust that the one who met Simon in his empty boat is near to every weary soul that has ever rowed home in the grey light with nothing to show for the night. To understand the weight Simon carried that night, you have to understand the life of a fisherman on that lake, because it was a hard and uncertain way to live, and it shaped the kind of man he had become. The Sea of Galilee, as they called it, though it was really a large freshwater lake, was the center of life for the towns along its shores. Whole families lived by its fish, going out in their small wooden boats, casting and hauling their nets through the dark hours when the fish would rise, and bringing in their catch at dawn to be sold and salted and sent out across the region. It was skilled work and demanding, requiring strength and knowledge and endurance, and a man like Simon had given his whole life to it, learning its ways from boyhood until the lake was as familiar to him as his own hands. But it was also a precarious life, lived always at the mercy of forces beyond a fisherman's control. The fish did not always run, the weather could turn in an instant, the calm lake rising into sudden and dangerous storms. And beyond the uncertainty of the water itself, there was the heavier and more constant burden that pressed on everyone in that land, the weight of living under the rule of Rome. We have spoken before of how that weight bore down on the people of Galilee, the taxes that took more than people could give, the debts that grew faster than honest work could pay them off, the constant low fear of losing everything to forces that cared nothing for the small lives they crushed. A fisherman might work himself to exhaustion night after night and still find himself sinking, owing more than he could ever earn, watching the means of his livelihood, his boat, his nets, the freedom of his family, all of it hanging by a thread he could not control. This was the burden Simon carried, and it had done something to him over the years, as such burdens do. It had made him hard and driven and proud in the particular way that capable men become proud. Pride that says, "I will handle this, I will find a way, I do not need anyone's help." He had learned to rely on himself because, as far as he could see, there was no one else to rely on. The empire would not help him. The system was rigged against him. And so he had set his jaw and gripped his life with both hands and determined to fight his way through by sheer effort and skill and will, the way he had fought his way through everything else. He was a man who solved his own problems. He was a man who did not break, or so he believed about himself. And so he needed to believe, because the alternative, the possibility that the burden might simply be too great for him, was too frightening to face. There is something deeply human in Simon's struggle, and you may recognize it in your own life or in the lives of people you love. Many of us have learned, as Simon did, to rely entirely on ourselves, to carry our burdens alone, to believe that admitting we need help is a kind of weakness we cannot afford. We grip our lives with both hands and grit our teeth and push through, certain that everything depends on us, that if we let go for even a moment, it will all come crashing down. There can be a strength in that, a real and admirable strength for a while. But it is also a kind of prison because it leaves us utterly alone with our burdens, unable to receive the help we most need, convinced that the whole weight of our world rests on our own two shoulders. And no shoulders, however strong, were ever meant to carry that. For here is the trap that the self-reliant heart cannot see from the inside. The very strength that has carried us so far becomes, eventually, the thing that keeps us from being rescued. As long as Simon believed he could handle it himself, he would never reach for help. As long as his own skill seemed like it might still be enough, he would keep casting his own nets in his own strength, trying harder, working longer, gripping tighter. It was only when that strength failed completely, only when the lake went silent and the nets came up empty night after night until there was nothing left to try, that his hands might finally begin to open. The breaking of his self-reliance was not his ruin, though it felt like ruin. It was the one thing that could make room for something greater than his own strength to enter his life. And so the lake had gone silent on him, in what must have felt like the cruelest possible moment, when he needed a catch most desperately. Night after night he had gone out, and night after night he had come back empty, and the silence of the water had begun to feel like a personal rejection, an insult to his skill, a mockery of everything he had built his life and his sense of himself upon. He was a fisherman who could not catch fish. The one thing he was good at, the one thing he could rely on, had abandoned him. And with each empty net, the foundations of his pride and his self-reliance cracked a little further, until, on this particular grey morning, after this particular long and fruitless night, he stood in his boat with nothing left, neither fish, nor strength, nor hope, nor any plan at all. He had come, though he did not yet know it, to exactly the place he needed to be. He had come to the end of himself. And it was there, precisely there, at the end of his own strength, that everything was about to change. It is worth picturing the lake itself for a moment, because it was the whole world to the people who lived around it. Or ringed by hills, fed by the river that ran down from the north, it lay low and broad and beautiful, its surface changing with every shift of the light, calm and silver in the still mornings, or dark and dangerous when the winds came down through the valleys and stirred it into sudden storms. The towns clustered along its shores lived by its rhythms, and the fishermen knew it as intimately as a person knows the face of someone they love. They knew which coves the fish favored, in which seasons, knew the deep places and the shallows, knew how to read the surface for the signs of a shoal below. Or to be a fisherman on that lake was to belong to it, to have it woven into your body and your habits and your sense of who you were. And so, when the lake gave Simon nothing, night after night, it was not only his livelihood that was threatened. It was his very sense of himself, his confidence, his place in the world. We should be honest about how heavy the burden of provision can be, because it is a burden many people carry in silence, then and now. To be responsible for feeding those you love, to lie awake doing the arithmetic of what you owe against what you have, to feel the slow, cold dread of not being able to keep the people in your care safe and fed, is one of the oldest and most grinding of human anxieties. Simon carried it the way countless people carry it still, with a clenched jaw and a private fear and a determination to handle it himself, and never let anyone see how frightened he was. That kind of burden does not announce itself loudly. It works away in the quiet, in the sleepless hours, in the tightness behind the eyes of someone who is smiling and telling everyone that everything is fine. Simon was a strong man, bearing a heavy and mostly hidden weight, and the lake's long silence was pressing that weight, past the point where even his strength could bear it. Let us go back then, into that long night on the water, and feel the weight of it, because the emptiness of that night is what made the morning so astonishing. It had begun, as fishing nights always began, with hope and purpose. Simon and his companions had pushed their boats out from the shore as the light faded into the dark water where the fish would rise, and they had set about their work with the practiced skill of men who had done this 1,000 times. They knew where to go, they knew how to cast, they knew the signs, the movements of the water, or the places the fish gathered in the cool of the night. Everything they knew told them this was the time, and these were the waters, and so they cast their nets with the confidence of long experience, waited and drew them in. And there was nothing. They cast again in another place and drew the nets in once more. Again, there was nothing. Hour after hour through the long dark, they worked the water, moving from spot to spot, trying every technique they knew, every place that had ever yielded a catch, and the lake gave them nothing at all. Nets came up empty, again and again, dripping and slack, holding nothing but water and weed. And as the night wore on, the mood in the boats would have darkened with the failure. The early confidence giving way to frustration, the frustration to a grim and weary determination. At last, as the hours passed and still nothing came, to something close to despair. For these were not amateurs having a run of bad luck. These were the best fishermen on the lake, doing everything right, and being met over and over with total and inexplicable silence. There is a particular bitterness in failing at the very thing you are best at. If Simon had failed at something he had never done before, he could have shrugged it off. But this was his craft, his life, the one thing in all the world he could do well. And the lake had simply closed itself to him. All his skill, all his knowledge, all his years of hard-won experience were proving completely useless. Every tool in his hands had failed. Every technique had come up empty. And there is no weariness quite like the weariness of a person whose best efforts have accomplished nothing at all, and who has poured out everything they have and has nothing to show for it, who has worked through the long dark with all their strength and skill and is left at dawn with empty hands. It is a weariness of the body, yes, the bone-deep ache of a sleepless night of hard labor. But it is far more a weariness of the soul, the crushing tiredness of trying and failing until you begin to wonder whether there is any point in trying at all. And so, as the sky began to lighten at last, the men brought their boats back into the shore. Defeated. There was nothing else to do. The night was over. The fish would not rise in the daylight. They had failed. They ran the boats up onto the sand and climbed out, stiff and exhausted, and began the dispiriting work of cleaning and mending the nets they had cast so uselessly all night long. The empty nets, the nets that had caught nothing. Or picture the scene in the cold grey light of that early morning, the tired men with their slumped shoulders and their raw hands, bending over the wet ropes, not speaking much, each of them alone with the bitter knowledge of a night entirely wasted. Picture Simon among them, perhaps the most defeated of all, because he had the most riding on it, because his pride and his livelihood and his very sense of who he was had all been staked on a catch that never came. It would come in that moment about as low as a capable man can come. Not to the dramatic despair of someone giving up on life, but to something quieter, and in its own way, just as humbling, or the simple, grinding exhaustion of a person who has tried everything they know and failed, or who has reached the limit of their own strength and found it was not enough, who has nothing left to give, and nothing to show for all they have given. He was empty, his nets were empty, and his hands were empty, and his hope was empty, and his pride, that great and stubborn pride that had kept him going for so long, was emptying out too, drop by drop, with each fruitless cast of the night. He had nothing left. And though he could not have known it, that emptiness was the most important thing about him that morning. For an empty vessel is the only kind that can be filled. This is something worth holding on to gently tonight. If you have ever known a season of that kind of emptiness, the weariness of having tried everything and seen it all come to nothing. Because in the world's way of thinking, that emptiness is simply failure, simply the end, or simply proof that we were not good enough, or strong enough, or clever enough. But in the deeper logic of this story, the emptiness is something else entirely. It is the necessary clearing of the ground. It is the opening of the gripping hands. It is the end of our own strength, which is so often the beginning of something far greater than our own strength could ever have produced. Simon did not know, as he bent wearily over his empty nets in the grey morning light, that his long night of failure had prepared him perfectly for what was about to happen. He only knew that he was tired and empty and beaten. On the shore behind him, a crowd was gathering around a man, and that man was about to turn and look at the weary fisherman, speak to him, and change the entire course of his life. It helps to understand why the night, and not the day, was the time for fishing on that lake, because it makes the silence of this particular night all the more telling. In the dark, The fish rose toward the surface and moved in shoals where the nets could take them, and the fishermen could not be seen by them in the blackness of the water. The fish sank away into the deep, scattered and wary, and the bright light made the nets visible and useless. Every fisherman knew this in his bones. The night was the time. The night was when the lake gave up its harvest, if it was going to give it at all. And so, to work all through the proper time, through the whole of the night that was made for fishing, with all the right skill in all the right places, and to take nothing, not a single fish, was not just bad luck. It was the lake refusing to behave as it always had, refusing to answer the skill that had always before been answered. It was the ground itself giving way beneath the one thing Simon was sure he could stand on. And there is a kind of grief in that. The grief of watching something you have always been able to count on simply stop working. Many of us know it in our own lives, when the thing that always carried us, the strength, the skill, the relationship, the plan, suddenly fails, and we are left standing on ground that has turned to water beneath our feet. It is frightening and it is disorienting, and it can feel like the floor of the world dropping away. But it is also sometimes the beginning of the only thing that could ever truly help us. Because as long as the old foundation held, we would never have looked for a deeper one. Simon's lake had gone silent, and his foundation had given way. And he did not yet know that the failing of the thing he trusted was making room for him to find someone far more worthy of his trust. As the tired fishermen worked at their nets on the shore, something began to happen further down the beach. Something that drew their weary attention away from their disappointment. A crowd was gathering. People were coming down to the water's edge in the early light. More and more of them, pressing together, all of them facing toward one man who stood among them near the lake. The fishermen, glancing up from their work, would have recognized the cause of it. For word had been spreading through all of Galilee about a teacher from Nazareth, man whose words drew crowds wherever he went, whose teaching was unlike anything the people had heard before. And here he was, on their own shore, in the early morning, with the people pressing in around him so eagerly that they were nearly pushing him into the water. For the crowd was hungry in a way that had nothing to do with bread. Although they were hungry to hear him, they pressed in close, straining to catch his words. The whole mass of them leaning toward him, the way plants lean toward the light. There was something in what this man said that met a deep need in them, that spoke to the longing and the weariness and the quiet desperation of ordinary people living hard, lives under a heavy hand. He spoke of God, but not in the cold and distant way they were used to. He spoke of a kingdom, but not the kind they had been taught to expect. He spoke as one who knew them, who saw them, who understood the burdens they carried. His words fell on their tired hearts like rain on dry ground. And so they came, and pressed in, more and more of them, until the man could barely move for the crowd around him. And here the man did something that connected his world to Simon's, something that must have surprised the weary fisherman. Looking for a little space between himself and the pressing crowd, the teacher turned to the boats drawn up on the shore, and he chose one of them, and it happened to be Simon's. He stepped into Simon's boat, the very boat that had caught nothing all night long, and he asked Simon to push it out a little way from the shore. It was a simple and practical request. From a boat just offshore, the man could face the crowd on the beach with a little distance between them. and the water would carry his voice back to them, and everyone could see and hear. So Simon, tired as he was, did as he was asked. He pushed the boat out a little way into the shallows, and the teacher sat down in it, in the way teachers sat to teach. And from Simon's own boat he began to speak to the crowd on the shore. Imagine Simon in that moment, sitting in his own boat just behind this teacher, close enough to touch him, listening as the man spoke to the crowd. Not asked. For this, he was exhausted, discouraged, wanting nothing more than to finish with his nets and go home and sleep off the bitterness of the wasted night. Instead, he found himself drafted into service, his boat become a teacher's platform, himself a captive audience to words he had not come to hear. And yet, sitting there, close behind the teacher, with the morning light on the water and the crowd hushed and leaning in, something must have begun to happen in Simon, almost against his will. For it is one thing to hear about a teacher from a distance, in the reports that spread from town to town. Or it is another thing entirely to sit just behind him, close enough to hear every word clearly. Close enough to feel the weight and the warmth of what he was saying, close enough that the words were no longer rumor but living voice. We are not told what the teacher said to the crowd that morning, what words he spoke from Simon's boat. But we know the effect such words had on those who heard them, how they reached past all the defenses of the weary heart and spoke directly to its deepest places. We may imagine that Simon, sitting there behind him, tired and empty, and not even wanting to listen, found the words working their way into him despite himself, found something in this man's voice and presence that began to stir even his defeated and self-reliant heart. Here was someone unlike anyone he had met. Here was a presence that carried a weight Simon could not name. A goodness, a depth, an authority that did not need to raise its voice or prove itself. And Simon, sitting close behind him in the morning light, must have begun to feel, beneath all his exhaustion, first stirrings of something he could not yet understand, a sense that he was in the presence of something far larger than an ordinary man. Then the teaching ended. The crowd, fed by the words, began to disperse along the shore, drifting back to their homes and their work, carrying what they had heard. And in the quiet that followed, the teacher turned, there in the boat, away from the emptying beach and toward the tired fisherman sitting behind him. He turned to Simon, this man who had caught nothing all night, this weary and discouraged craftsman with his empty nets and his emptied pride. But he looked at him, and what he said next was so simple and so impossible and so completely against everything Simon knew about his own craft, that it would force the fisherman to a choice that would determine the entire course of his life. The teacher looked at the exhausted man who had failed all night long, and he told him to go out and try again. There is a quiet meaning in the fact that the Lord chose a fisherman's boat for his pulpit that morning. It is worth pausing on. He did not stand on a rock, or climb a hill, or build himself a platform. He took the ordinary working tool of an ordinary working man, the very boat that had failed to catch anything all night, and he made it the place from which the words of life went out to the crowd. The thing that had been, only hours before, a vessel of failure and disappointment, became, in his hands, a vessel of blessing for a whole hungry multitude. And perhaps that is its own small picture of what he does with the things we count as failures, the empty boats of our own lives. He does not despise them. He climbs in. He uses the very things we are most discouraged by, and turns them, in ways we could never have planned, into the means of something good. And there is something tender too, in imagining Simon's reluctant, weary obedience, even in this small thing, the pushing out of the boat. He did not yet know who this man was. He was tired and discouraged, and wanted only to be done. Yet, when asked, he did it. He pushed the boat out and held it steady, and let the teacher use it, all, performing a small and ordinary act of service when he least felt like serving anyone. We should not pass over that too quickly, because the great turning of his life began with that small willingness. Often it is the same with us. The large surrender, when it comes, is made possible by a string of small ones. The little daily choices to do the next small thing we are asked, even when we are tired, even when we do not yet understand. Simon's morning of miracle began with the humble act of lending his boat. Smallest, yes, can be the doorway to the largest grace. Put out into the deep water, the teacher said, and let down your nets for a catch. Words hung in the morning air, simple and quiet, and yet to Simon they must have sounded almost absurd. Put out into the deep, and let down your nets for a catch in the broad daylight, after a whole night of catching nothing. To a man who had spent his entire life on this lake, who knew its every rhythm, this was not just an unlikely suggestion. It went against everything his experience had taught him. For the fish of that lake were caught at night, in the dark hours, when they rose toward the surface. To fish in the bright light of day, when the fish stayed deep and scattered, and would not come near the nets, was simply not done. Every fisherman knew it. It was the most basic knowledge of the craft. And here was a carpenter from an inland hill town, a man who knew nothing of fishing, telling a master fisherman to do the one thing that any fisherman knew was pointless. We can feel the resistance rise in Simon, the wounded pride, the weary frustration, the simple expertise that knew better. Imagine the things that must have moved through his mind in that moment. We are professionals. We have done this all our lives. We have just worked all night, or proper time, and caught nothing. The fish are not running. It is daylight now, the worst possible time. We are exhausted. Nets are cleaned and mended and put away. And you, a carpenter, are telling me my own business, telling me to go out and fish in the middle of the morning. It was, on every level, Simon understood, a foolish command, an unreasonable request, even a kind of insult to his skill and his hard-won knowledge. Lost everything in him that was a fisherman, everything in him that was proud and capable and self-reliant, must have wanted to refuse, and indeed Simon began to protest. "Master," he said, "we worked hard all through the night and caught nothing." You can hear in those words the weariness and the wounded expertise, the gentle pushing back of a man who knows his craft. We have already tried, we have done the work at the right time with all our skill, and it came to nothing. The implication was clear. There is no point. The fish are not there. I know this lake. I am telling you, there is nothing to catch. It was the voice of experience, the voice of competence, the voice of a man who had every reason to say no and to go home to his well-earned sleep. By every measure that Simon understood, refusing would have been the only sensible thing to do. But then something shifted. In the middle of his protest, something turned in Simon's heart. It is one of the most important turnings in this whole story, so let us watch it closely. For after laying out all the reasons it made no sense, after stating plainly that he had already tried and failed, Simon added 5 small words that changed everything. because you say so, he said, I will let down the nets. Because you say so, at your word, I will do it. He could not explain it. It made no sense by anything he knew. Every instinct of his craft and his pride told him to refuse. And yet there was something about this man, something he had felt sitting close behind him as he taught, some weight of authority and goodness and presence that Simon could not name and could not resist. And so, against all his experience, against all his exhaustion, against all his pride, he chose to obey. Not because it made sense, but because of who was asking. And here we touch the heart of what this whole story has been moving toward, or the deep truth hidden inside that simple act of surrender. For Simon's whole life had been built on his own strength, his own skill, his own knowledge, his own ability to handle things himself. Now, at the end of a night that had proven all of that to be not enough, he was being asked to set it all aside, or to lay down his own expertise, to stop trusting in himself and to trust instead in the word of another. Not to put out into the deep, not because his own judgment told him to, but simply because this man said so. It was the very opposite of everything Simon had lived by. It was surrender. It was the laying down of the self-reliant heart. And it was, though Simon could not have known it, the doorway to everything he had ever truly needed. Because this is so often how the great turnings of a life come, not through a dramatic event, but through a single quiet act of surrender, a single moment when we stop insisting on our own way and our own strength and choose, against all our instincts, to trust. Simon could not see what was about to happen. He had no guarantee that the nets would not come up empty again, as they had all night long. By every rational measure, he was about to waste even more effort on an even more hopeless attempt. But he had decided to trust the word of the one who asked. And that decision, that small and seemingly foolish act of obedience at the end of his own strength, was about to open the door to a miracle that would change his life forever. He took up the heavy nets once more, weary as he was, and he and his companions pushed the boat out, away from the shore, toward the deep water, to let down their nets one more time, not because it made sense, but because he had been asked by one he was beginning, against all reason, to trust. There is something here for your own heart tonight, in whatever place you find yourself stuck or weary or out of your own resources. For sometimes the way forward is not another effort of our own strength, not trying harder at the thing that has already failed, but a quiet act of trust, a willingness to put out into deeper water than we would choose on our own. Or simply because we sense that we are being asked to by one who can be trusted. The deep water is frightening. It is beyond where our own competence feels safe, but it is so often exactly there, out in the deep, past the limits of what we can manage on our own, that the things we most need are waiting for us. Simon was rowing out into the deep, against all his experience. At the word of a stranger he was learning to trust, and the deep was about to give up a miracle. It is worth dwelling on the word the Lord used, or call to go out into the deep, because there is meaning hidden in it beyond the matter of fishing. Simon had been fishing near the shore, in the familiar waters, in the places he knew and could manage. And the Lord called him out, past the comfortable margins, into the deep water, where a man cannot touch the bottom, or where he must trust the boat and the water and the one who sent him. The deep is always where the trust is tested, because the deep is where our own footing gives out. As long as we stay in the shallows, in the places we can control and manage and predict, We never have to truly trust anyone but ourselves. Or it is only when we are called out past our depth, into waters where our own strength cannot save us, odd, that real faith is asked of us, and real faith becomes possible. The Lord did not call Simon to a safer, smaller version of his life. He called him out into the deep, where everything would depend on trust. They rowed out into the deep water, the weary men, and when they had reached the place, Simon and his companions let down the nets once more into the bright morning water, with no real expectation of anything, simply doing as they had been asked. And the moment the nets settled into the deep, something happened that none of them was prepared for. There was a sudden pull, a great living weight surging into the nets, a force so strong and so immediate that it nearly tore the boat sideways. Nets, which had hung slack and empty all night long, were suddenly straining, heavy, alive, filling with fish, faster than the men could believe, a vast multitude of them rushing into the nets out of the depths, until the ropes groaned with the weight and the water churned and boiled with silver bodies. Imagine the shock of it after the long, empty night. The men hauling with all their strength, and still the nets coming up so heavy they could barely move them, so full that the very nets began to tear under the strain. There were more fish than they had ever seen, more than the nets could hold, more than the boat could carry. Simon and his companions, straining and shouting, realized they could not manage it alone. And they called out across the water to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And the others came, and they began to fill both boats with the catch, fish upon fish pouring in, glittering in the morning sun, until both boats were so laden, so heavy with the weight of the impossible catch, that they began to sit dangerously low in the water, so full that they were in danger of sinking. Picture that scene, in the full light of the morning, the two boats wallowing low in the water, piled high with a shining mountain of fish, the men knee-deep in the catch, breathless and amazed, nets torn and straining, the water all around, still churning with the abundance of it. Only hours before, these same men had hauled up empty net after empty net through the long dark night, their skill useless, their hope gone, their hands raw with fruitless labor. Now, in a single moment, at the word of one man, in the worst possible conditions, in the bright daylight, when no fish should have been caught at all, they had taken in a catch, so vast it defied all reason, so great that it overwhelmed their boats, and broke their nets, and surpassed anything they had seen in all their years on the water. The emptiness of the night had been answered in an instant with an abundance beyond all measure. And here we come to the moment that reveals what this story is truly about, because Simon's response to the miracle was not at all what we might expect. A man drowning in debt, a man who had staked everything on a catch, suddenly given a haul of fish worth more than he could have dreamed, might be expected to shout for joy, to dance, to celebrate the windfall that had just lifted the crushing weight of his troubles in a single stroke. But that is not what Simon did. For Simon understood, in that overwhelming moment, that he was in the presence of something far greater than a lucky catch. He understood that no ordinary man could have done what this man had just done, that the one sitting in his boat had a power and an authority that belonged to God alone. In the face of that holiness, Simon did not celebrate. He collapsed. He fell down at the knees of the teacher, there in the fish-filled boat. And the words that broke from him were not words of joy, but words of awe and dread, and overwhelming unworthiness. "Away from me, Lord," he said, "for I am a sinful man." Or hear what is happening in those words. In the blazing presence of such holiness, Simon suddenly saw himself clearly, saw all his pride, all his self-reliance, all the small and dark calculations of his desperate heart, or saw the whole truth of who he was laid bare in the light of who this man was. And he was undone by it. He felt the infinite distance between his own brokenness and the purity standing before him. And his first instinct was to draw back, to ask this holy presence to depart, because he felt on with a terrible clarity that he was not worthy to be near it. It was not the response of a man who had won a prize. It was the response of a man who had glimpsed the living God and seen himself for the first time. Oh, truly, this is one of the most honest and human moments in all of Scripture, and it tells us something profound about what happens when a soul truly encounters the holy. Might imagine that meeting God would feel mostly like comfort, like warmth, like reassurance. And it is those things in the end. But the first thing it often is for an honest heart is exposure. To stand in the presence of perfect goodness is to see suddenly and undeniably all the ways we fall short of it. Simon, the proud and capable fisherman who had spent his life sure of his own strength, was brought in a single moment to his knees, not by failure but by an encounter with a goodness so pure that it showed him the truth about himself. And his pride, which the empty night had cracked, now shattered completely, and he knelt in the bottom of his boat among the fish, and confessed that he was a sinful man, unworthy to be in the presence of the one who stood before him. Yet, here is the wonder that we will come to fully in a moment, the wonder that turns this whole scene from despair to glory. Simon asked the Lord to depart from him, certain that his unworthiness made him unfit for such a presence. But the Lord did not depart. The Lord did not agree that Simon was too sinful, too broken, or too unworthy to be near him. Instead, the one whose holiness had brought Simon to his knees was about to reach down to the kneeling, broken, weeping fisherman and lift him up and give him not rejection but a calling, not distance but the closest possible companionship, not condemnation but a brand new life. For this, it turns out, is exactly the kind of person the Lord calls. Not the proud and the self-assured, but the broken and the humbled, the ones who have come to the end of themselves and fallen on their knees. And is to that astonishing calling that we now turn. It is worth noticing too that the abundance came only after the surrender, never before it. The Lord did not first fill the nets to prove himself, and then ask Simon to obey once the evidence was in. He asked for the obedience first, in the daylight, against all reason, with no guarantee at all, and the abundance followed the trust. This is almost always the order of things in this story and in our own lives. We want the proof first, the full nets first, and then we will trust. But faith does not work that way. Faith lets down the nets while they are still empty, nothing more than the word of the one who asks and discovers the abundance only on the far side of the obedience. Simon could so easily have refused, could have insisted on staying in the safe shallows of his own judgment, and he would have rowed home with empty nets and never known what the deep was holding for him. Miracle was waiting on the other side of a yes he almost did not give. Not be afraid, the Lord said. These were the first words he spoke to the kneeling, trembling fisherman, and they are worth holding on to, because they are the words he so often speaks to those who fall before him in their unworthiness. Simon had asked him to depart, certain that his sinfulness made him unfit for such a presence. And the Lord answered gently, "Do not be afraid." He did not depart. He did not agree with Simon's verdict on himself. He did not say, "Yes, you are right. You are too sinful. I will go." He said the opposite. He said, "Do not be afraid," and in those words was all the welcome and all the grace that Simon could not have dared to hope for. The holiness that had brought him to his knees was not a holiness that pushed him away. It was a holiness that drew him in, that reached down to the broken man and lifted him up, met his confession of unworthiness, not with rejection, but with reassurance and love. And then the Lord gave Simon something extraordinary, something that took the very thing Simon had failed at and transformed it into the shape of his whole new life. "Now on," he said, "you will fish for people. From now on, you will catch men." Think of the beauty and the genius of those words. Simon was a fisherman. It was his craft, his identity, the thing he knew, and the thing he had just failed at so completely all through the long, empty night. And the Lord took that very identity, that broken and humbled craft, and he did not discard it, but transformed it, lifting it up into something far greater. "You have spent your life catching fish," he said in effect. From now on, you will catch people. You will draw men and women out of the dark waters of their lost and weary lives and into the light of the kingdom." The very skill that had failed him, redeemed and transformed, would become the shape of his calling. This is how the Lord works, again and again, and it is worth letting it sink deep into your own heart tonight. He does not despise what we are. He does not throw away our histories, our skills, even our failures. He takes them up, redeems them, and weaves them into something far greater than we could have imagined. Simon the fisherman became Simon the fisher of men, and the very craft that had defined his old life became the picture of his new one. Nothing was wasted. The long years on the water, the knowledge of nets and depths and patience, even the bitter lesson of the empty night, all of it was gathered up and given new meaning in the calling the Lord laid upon him. The Lord did not call Simon to be someone entirely different. He called Simon to be most truly himself, his whole self, redeemed and aimed at last toward the thing it was always meant for. Notice who it was that the Lord called: not a perfect man, not a holy man, not a man who had his life together and his pride intact and his nets full of fish. He called a broken man, a man who had just failed at his own craft all night long, a man kneeling in the bottom of a boat, confessing that he was a sinner, and whose pride and self-reliance had been shattered into pieces. It was precisely there, at the lowest point of Simon's life, in the very moment of his deepest humbling, that the Lord reached down and called him to the greatest work of his life. The Lord did not wait for Simon to clean himself up, to prove himself worthy, to become impressive. He called him in his brokenness, in his weeping, in his confessed unworthiness, because that brokenness was exactly the soil in which a great calling could grow. There is profound comfort in this for anyone who has ever felt too broken, too sinful, or too much of a failure to be of any use to God. Because the story of Simon tells us, as plainly as anything could, that the Lord does not call the worthy. He calls the willing, and he makes them worthy. He does not wait for us to be strong before he uses us. He meets us at the end of our own strength, in the very place of our deepest failure and humbling, and it is there that he speaks our calling over us. If you have ever felt that your failures, your brokenness, your sense of unworthiness disqualify you from anything good, then hear the words the Lord spoke to the kneeling fisherman. Not be afraid. Your brokenness is not the end of your story. It may, in fact, be exactly where your truest calling begins. For it was Simon's emptiness that made room for the calling. As long as he had been full of himself, full of his own strength and skill and pride, there was no room in him for anything greater. It was only when all of that had been emptied out, when the long night had stripped away his self-reliance, and the great catch had shattered his pride, and the holiness of the Lord had brought him to his knees, that he was finally empty enough to be filled with something new. The Lord could not have called the proud and self-sufficient Simon of the night before, a man so sure of his own strength. He could only call the humbled and emptied Simon of the morning, the man who had come to the end of himself and fallen on his knees. The breaking was not the obstacle to the calling. The breaking was the preparation for it. And this is the deep truth at the heart of our whole story tonight, the truth worth carrying into sleep. It is when we come to the end of our own strength, when we stop trying to save ourselves and finally fall to our knees, that the real transformation begins. Simon spent the long night trying to fill his own nets by his own strength and failed. It was only when he surrendered, only when he obeyed against all reason, only when he was brought low and emptied out, that the abundance came, and the calling came, and the new life came. The world tells us to be strong, to rely on ourselves, to never let go, to fill our own nets. But this story tells us something truer and far more freeing. It tells us that our strength is not the answer, that our striving cannot fill the deepest emptiness, and that the moment we stop and surrender and fall to our knees is the very moment the miracle can finally begin. There is one more thing worth seeing in the new name the Lord gave him, the calling to gather people rather than fish. For a net does not force the fish, and a true fisher of men does not force anyone either. Work the Lord was calling Simon to was not a work of coercion or pressure, but of patient, loving gathering, of drawing the weary and the lost gently in toward the light, the way Simon himself had just been drawn. He would spend the rest of his life doing for others what had just been done for him. Finding people at the end of their own strength, in their own empty and fruitless nights, and bringing them word of the one who meets us there. His own rescue became the very shape of his mission. That too is how it so often goes. The comfort we have received becomes the comfort we are able to give. The place where we were met in our emptiness becomes the place from which we can meet others in theirs. Nothing in Simon's long, hard night was wasted. All of it became part of how he would one day help to carry others home. And so we come to the quiet end of tonight's story, and to its final astonishing image, the image of what Simon did next. For when the boats had been brought back to the shore, laden with the greatest catch of his life, heavy with more fish than he had ever dreamed of taking, worth more than enough to lift the crushing weight of all his troubles, Simon did the most unexpected thing of all. He left it. He left the boats and the nets and the shining mountain of fish, the very thing he had labored all night to find. The very thing that could have solved every problem that had pressed him so low. He left it all on the shore, and he followed the one who had called him. And he was not alone, for his companions, James and John, who had seen it all, left their boats and their nets too. And the little band of fishermen turned their backs on everything they had known and walked away up the beach behind the teacher from Nazareth into a new and unknown life. Oyen, think of the wonder of that. Only hours before, that catch of fish would have seemed like the answer to all of Simon's prayers, or thing he would have given almost anything to have. Now, having received it, he simply left it behind because he had found something worth infinitely more. He had found the one who could fill not just his nets, but his empty and weary soul, the one whose call gave his whole life a new and glorious purpose. Beside that, even the greatest catch of his life had become a small thing, easily left on the sand. He had been chasing fish, chasing security, chasing a way out of his troubles by his own strength. He found, instead, someone who offered him a life so much larger that the old goals simply fell away. He left his answered prayer on the beach and followed the one who was the answer to a deeper prayer he had not even known how to pray. There is something here for your own heart tonight, in whatever you have been chasing, or whatever you have been straining to catch by your own strength. For so often the things we pursue so desperately, the security, the success, the solution to our troubles, are smaller than we think, and the deepest answer to our weariness is not the thing we are chasing at all, but someone who offers us a whole new life. Simon learned that the abundance he had longed for was not the point. The point was the one who gave it, and the new life he offered, and the calling that gave everything meaning. And when Simon saw that clearly, he could leave the lesser thing behind without a backward glance, because he had found the greater thing, the thing his soul had been truly hungry for all along. Remember, as you drift towards sleep, that this morning on the shore was a beginning, not an end, one more turning point in a long and unfolding story. The little band of fishermen who walked away from their boats that day were the first of those the Lord would gather to himself. The beginning of a company that would grow and follow him through all that was to come, through the teaching and the healing and the wonder, through the dark days ahead and the bright morning beyond them, out at last into all the world. Simon, the broken and humbled fisherman, would become one of the closest of all the Lord's companions, would walk with him through everything, would fail again and be restored again, and would become, the end, exactly what the Lord had named him on the shore, a fisher of men, a foundation stone of something that would outlast every empire. But all of that is still ahead of us in the many nights to come, as we keep walking this long and beautiful road together. So let your shoulders come down now, and let your breathing grow slow and deep, and let the long day you carried into this hour begin to loosen and fall away. If you are weary tonight, if you have been straining and striving and coming up empty, if you have reached the end of your own strength and found it was not enough, then hear the gentle truth of this story as you fall asleep. You do not have to fill your own nets. You do not have to save yourself by your own strength. You do not have to be strong enough or skilled enough or worthy enough. You have only to surrender, to put out into the deep at his word, to fall to your knees and let yourself be lifted up. Miracle does not begin with your striving. It begins where your striving ends, in the place of surrender, the empty hands that are finally open to receive. Let this be a small prayer as you settle into the quiet. For the one who met a weary fisherman at the end of his strength, meet me there too tonight. Where I have been striving and coming up empty, teach me to surrender. Where I have trusted only in myself, help me to trust in you. Or where I have felt too broken to be of any use, speak my calling over me and lift me up, and do not be far from me. And let me rest tonight in the knowledge that you do not call the worthy, but the willing, and that you are not far from the broken, but very near. And now may peace be upon you, real and deep, the peace of the morning after the empty night, the peace of nets filled to overflowing by a hand greater than your own. May the burdens you have carried grow light. May you know, as you fall asleep, that you do not have to save yourself. That you are not as alone as you have felt, and that the one who meets the weary at the end of their strength is very near to you tonight. Rest now, friend. Put down the heavy nets. You can stop striving now. You can let yourself be carried. Sleep gently, and we will walk on together toward the morning when you are ready. Before you let the day go, hold one last image in your mind, the image of those boats full of fish left lying on the shore in the morning sun. It is a strange and beautiful picture, the abandoned abundance, the answered prayer left behind. And it holds a quiet freedom that your own heart may need tonight. For so much of our striving is aimed at filling our own boats, at catching the thing we are sure will finally make us safe. And Simon shows us that, even when we get it, even when the nets come up overflowing, it is not the thing our souls were truly made for. He found something better than a full boat. He found the one who fills the soul, and beside that, all the fish on the shore were a small thing, easily left. If your own arms are tired tonight from gripping the things you have been chasing, you are allowed to loosen them. And to remember that the deepest thing you long for is not a fuller boat, but the one who stood on the shore and called a weary fisherman by a brand new name.